2 decades on, the US remembers the 9/11 terror attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people. President Biden will lead the commemorations near the site of the World Trade Center. Another evacuation flight has taken off from Kabul airport after 200 people were flown out on Thursday. Qatari officials working with the Taliban to reopen the airport say it is up and running. Lebanon has a new government after 13 months of political deadlock that's seen the currency lose 90% of its value. President Michel Aoun has accepted the administration proposed by Prime Minister Najib Mikati. For the first time in 22 years, 2 teenagers will face each other in the US Open final. 18-year-old Briton Emma Raducanu will battle 19-year-old Canadian Leylah Fernandez for the women's title on Saturday.
Denmark lifts all restrictions related to COVID-19 as more than 80% of the population is fully vaccinated. Ukraine's president tells a meeting of European officials in Kyiv that his country's relations with Russia are broken and could result in war. In Japan, the minister in charge of coronavirus vaccinations, Taro Kono, enters the race to lead the ruling party in an election likely to decide the next prime minister. And in Singapore, zoo officials hold a party for the mother of a yet-to-be-named baby boy panda.
And after the September 11th attacks, President George W. Bush quickly announced that the U.S. would enter Afghanistan.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. In the face of today's new threat, the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it.
It was less than a month after the 9/11 attacks, and here's a split screen of then-President Bush in the White House Treaty Room, and nearly 20 years later, President Biden in that same room announcing our exit from Afghanistan. So what was it all for? Let's bring in ABC News contributor and former FBI agent Brad Garrett, senior fellow at New York University Center for Global Affairs and fellow at the Center for International Cooperation, Rina Amiri, and assistant research professor for the Center of Future War at the School of Politics and Global Studies at Arizona State, and the author of the book, No Good Men Among the Living, America, the Taliban, and the War Through Afghan Eyes. Anand Gopal, thank you all for being here today. Brad, I'd like to start with you. Do you feel we accomplished what we initially set out to when we first entered Afghanistan?
No, and I think the issue with Afghanistan was invading Afghanistan. Going after al-Qaeda, going after bin Laden, of course. But you needed to focus on that, not focusing on taking over the entire country, which everyone knew would be a huge problem because no one has been successful in doing that. So you go 20 years later, we finally leave, and now you have the Taliban who were running Afghanistan basically before we invaded Afghanistan. So we've created a circle, and some are concerned that we may even end up with a bigger terrorist state now that we've left, and the Taliban basically are going to run the country and probably mix in with other extremist groups.
Now, Rina, in the aftermath of 9/11, we experienced an anthrax attack, the D.C. sniper attack, entering Afghanistan, the war on terror, entering Iraq. What impact do you think all these events have had on the United States and where we are today?
I think that the whole approach of the war on terror has been, I think, has been confusing and has been misdirected in the way that we've gone about it. The way that we approached Afghanistan through purely a lens of war on terror is one of the reasons why we have failed, I think, in a very significant way. And as your previous speaker noted, it is a country where you have the Taliban in a stronger position, in a more strategic position. They are more legitimized, and the country is as vulnerable, if not more vulnerable, to terrorist attacks because we had the singular lens that I think led us to miss. So we needed a broader aperture to look at how to actually address this issue.
And Anand, you have written a lot about the effects of the war in Afghanistan on the women there. So what are some of the key points you learned in your reporting?
Well, you know, we tend to think of the war in Afghanistan as being very wasteful and destructive to Americans, and it certainly was. But an extraordinary number of Afghan civilians, men and women, have died. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. I was recently this summer in southern Afghanistan meeting Afghan women, and the stories they were telling me were just shocking. On average, they lost between 10 to 12 members of their family over the last 2 decades. Most of these losses have never been recorded by official bodies. It's really an unheralded toll. And people are on the ground have to live with this, which is all the more jarring when we consider that the Taliban control today more territory than they did on September 11th, 2001.
One of the big things that people often point to say that it was worth it is the fact that we haven't had a major terror attack in this country since. The events of 9/11 also led to a major restructuring of our security and our intelligence agencies. So do you think overall we're safer now because of that?
I think the real issue...
Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think we're safer perhaps from catastrophic attacks like 9/11. Do I think we're safer from lone actor attacks? And the answer is no. In fact, I think there's a bigger threat. And the problem, Diane, is that it splits, in my view, to 2 directions. One, Islamic extremists we've been talking about this morning, and obviously domestic terrorists here in this country that are extremely angry about who's in office today, how the government is running, etc. And the FBI would tell you that's our biggest threat. Again, focusing on lone actors. So I think if you want to draw a line and say, are we safer today from attack? I would say no. From a low-tech individual or maybe 2 people attack, but we clearly have gotten better at heading off anything anywhere close to 9/11.
And Anand, you seem like you wanted to add to that. Is there something you wanted to say?
No, I agree. Just to say that, by invading Afghanistan and then invading Iraq, we created lots of enemies, lots of people who previously had no interest in being opposed to the United States became opposed because of the excesses and the destruction caused by the war on terror.
All right, Brad Garrett, Rina Amiri, and Anand Gopal, we appreciate your time today. Thank you all.
We start here in Japan, where personnel at a U.S. Army base near Tokyo have held a memorial ceremony for the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attacks just ahead of the 20th anniversary. The attacks killed 2,977 people, including 24 Japanese. About 40 people attended the ceremony Friday at Camp Zama in Kanagawa Prefecture. Garrison Commander Christopher Tomlinson helped to place a wreath as part of the commemoration.
Today, we remember those who lost their lives that day. We honor their memories and pay tribute to the patriots and their families who have sacrificed in the defense of freedom.
The commander noted citizens from 78 countries were killed in the attack on the World Trade Center in New York City and the Defense Department headquarters outside Washington, D.C.
Our hearts are with those families and those Japanese citizens that also lost lives on 9/11. I think over the past 20 years, it is demonstrated that we need to remain united and strong in our Japanese and American alliance.
The anniversary holds special significance for emergency workers who flew in to help search Ground Zero. One of them is Shizawa Koichi, a firefighter from Japan.
What I saw at Ground Zero is still clear. I remember as if it happened yesterday.
When Shizawa heard about the attack, he immediately contacted a friend in New York. His fellow firefighter sent out a cry for help, and Shizawa answered. Nearly a month after September 11th, he and some other firefighters flew to New York to volunteer. Shizawa remembers how access to Ground Zero was restricted out of fear there could be another attack. They were allowed in for only 1 day. Shizawa had years of disaster experience, but he says this was unlike anything he'd ever seen.
I got a 360-degree view of the area. Wherever I looked, everything around me was broken. And I knew thousands of people were still buried under my feet. We had a strong desire to pull them out of there as fast as we could.
Shizawa continues to volunteer. In 2011, he helped with the aftermath of the massive earthquake and tsunami that hit northeastern Japan. He also shares his experiences with young firefighters around the world.
When I'm at an affected area, I tell myself that we are the only ones who can get these people back to their daily lives. That feeling became stronger after 9/11. If a community ever asks for help, I will try to do as much as I can.
Shizawa says tragedies like 9/11 transcend borders, reminding firefighters of the bonds they share. Hong Kong's district councillors have started taking a mandatory oath of allegiance to the territory and its basic law. That's adding to concerns political freedom in the territory is being stamped out. The first oath-taking ceremonies took place on Friday in 4 districts. Over 200 councillors are expected to take the oath. The Hong Kong government introduced the requirement after Beijing revised the territory's electoral law earlier this year. It says the territory should be governed by patriots. Anyone violating the oath can be disqualified and subject to criminal punishment. About 270 pro-democracy councillors who oppose the government have resigned since June. Following an election in late 2019, the pro-democracy camp accounted for more than 80% of district council seats, but more than half have stepped down. The 211 councillors due to take the oath include some already indicted for breaching the national security law. A pro-government newspaper reports about 50 could be disqualified. Turning to the coronavirus situation here in Japan, the number of new cases reported across the nation on Friday continued to decline. It comes as the government is extending the state of emergency in many parts of the country, including Tokyo and Osaka. Authorities confirmed nearly 8,900 infections on Friday. The average number of new cases over the past 7 days was 64% that of the previous week. But the government says the medical system is still under great strain. It's decided to extend strict antivirus measures beyond this weekend through the end of the month. Now the vaccine rollout continues to make steady progress. The government says everyone who wants to get shots will get them by October or November. Officials plan to ease restrictions using a system that checks vaccination certificates or negative test results. Restrictions on bars and restaurants, as well as travel across prefectural borders, would be relaxed. But experts say measures should not be eased until the state of emergency is lifted. They note there are still more than 2,000 patients around the country in serious condition.
People will need to continue to take various precautions when they travel or eat out. It will be important to relax restrictions on people's activities one step at a time.
Tateda says the authorities must try to minimize the number of new cases to prevent another surge. Toyota Motor has announced it'll cut global production by an additional 400,000 or so units in September and October. Officials cite difficulty in procuring parts from Southeast Asia, where coronavirus infections are surging. The cut is in addition to 360,000 already announced by the automaker. The firm plans to reduce production by another 70,000 units in September and about 330,000 units in October. As a result, output will only be about half the original plan this month and down by around 40% next month. The ongoing global shortage of semiconductors is another factor. Toyota has lowered its domestic and overseas production forecast for the current fiscal year through March, saying the outlook for November and beyond is unclear. It now expects to turn out around 9 million units rather than 9.3 million. But the company says it has no plans to change its operating income forecast. Toyota officials say infection surges in Southeast Asia are taking longer to subside than they had expected. They say they'll take all possible measures to meet